So, Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters, and if there are any non-Muslims amongst us today, a very pleasant good morning to you all. So, in looking at the topic, ways and means of dealing with the challenges that face the Muslim community, the essence of it to me lies in some key questions that need to be asked. First of all, what are the challenges that we face? What are the limitations to the responses that we can pursue? And then based on that, what are the responses themselves that are available? So in terms of the challenges, what are the challenges that we face as Muslims in the global community today? We could use any number of different frameworks, different lenses to explore this. I have taken quite simply an external view and an internal view. We as a Muslim community, what are those things that are affecting us from outside the community? And then internally, what are those things within the community that we need to pay attention to? So on the external bit, and probably I would venture the most important one, and as well the one that gets the least amount of attention, is the whole issue of this illusion of science versus religion. And I see that as something that is critical, something that we need to be mindful of, because Islam is construed, is interpreted in our environment as a religion. All religions are under attack, and Islam is not excluded from it. And I call it an illusion because science itself today has proven to be nothing more than another religion based on the beliefs and the assumptions that they perpetuate. The danger to us is that there's an emphasis on this empirical data or the material or tangible proof, and therefore it relegates all our beliefs as some of our fundamental beliefs as myths and legends. Things like jinn and heaven and hell. You all must be so backward to be believing in things like heaven and hell and so on. That's where we're at. That's the message that we're hearing in the context of the empirical material versus the religious. And looking ahead to the generations who would be exposed to that more than we have ever been, I think that's an area that we need to pay attention to. As well, if we look at the history of it, we can appreciate as Muslims that there have been a lot of contributions through religion, in the name of religion, to the development of science. Averroes, Ibn Sina, Ibn Khaldun, and Rumi and Ghazali. I mean, it goes on and on. Al-Jabara for maths, etc. But as well, we can't ignore the fact that other religions being dominant have also contributed to holding back science. And in some cases, some aspects of Muslim civilization as well. So there requires a particular spin, a particular interpretation on that as we move forward, as we extend Islam in our immediate and extended environments globally. So there's this illusion of science versus religion, and the other big one that we all hear about all the time is Islam versus the West. Islamic values versus Western values. Should an individual be completely free to pursue whatever is in their best interest, or should there be limits? Who imposes those limits? Is a conversation that has been ongoing, and it's been pretty interesting to note that the advocates for the Western perspectives have taken the contentious areas of Islam and they have been merciless in highlighting it. So the hijab as a symbol, an external symbol of barbarianism and suppression of women and so on. In this contemporary era, where women and men are equal to do whatever, yeah, and so on. The hijab, the slaughter for Qurbani, etc., etc. There have been a lot of attention being paid to that, almost as if it's, well, here's currency and you just spend, yeah. Here's material on Islam and you just go to town on it. That cannot be divorced from the socio-political / economic global reality, the politics of oil in the Middle East, the politics of immigration to the formerly Muslim colonies of Europe, and we've seen a lot of contention and tension within there. It's interesting to note Saddam Hussein Gaddafi actually raised it in the UN, where he said it's widely known the enemy of an Arab is the best friend of another Arab, and it's almost as if we're seeing that play out, where within the Arab Muslim community we're seeing some siding force against the welfare of others and so on. So Islam versus the West. Ideologically, there is a problem or there is a conflict, and it's something that we can take up and champion as well as they have been doing. And then on the other side, in terms of the economics and so on, we are seeing some manipulations. To what extent we could address that, you're seeing efforts by OIC, Organization of Islamic Countries, and so on. And it may be in our best interest to begin to reference those things, maybe contribute to it. There are some positives that I just want to note very quickly. Islamic finance has been the most innovative aspect of global financial systems. And in a world where we're actually living through the failure or the looming failure of currency as we know it, here is something that is most likely to survive. Yeah, the Islamic financial model. So some finance experts are paying more attention to that, re-engineering Islamic financial models to something that is a bit more appealing to the Western palate. Yeah. As well, interestingly enough, the Islamic approach to jihad and terrorism and whatever other labels have been applied, whilst they cast a shadow on Islam, it's something that academia has been paying attention to. So William Starbuck, Gary Cooper, in their consideration of 21st century leadership and management issues, actually looked at that. Here is a global entity, purely voluntary, who are able to mobilize and act based on ideology, wherever they are, with or without direct connection to the base. And they looked at that in the context of Al-Qaeda, and we're seeing it now in terms of ISIS, and we saw it before with the new jackals, and it's something that has been going on. So they are trying to understand what is it about Islam that can mobilize cells from anywhere in the world to commit, to give what is most precious, which is human life, to a cause. If we could find out that, man, we have volunteers for life, you know. We don't even have to pay them, you know. I mean, this is fantastic. It's exactly what we need. So a lot of attention being paid to that. So on the external side, you have science versus religion, you have Islam versus the West, and you also have some positives that are emanating that are not very well highlighted. And it is not the development of it, the research in it, is not being championed by Muslims even, it's being championed by the West. On the internal side, within the Muslim community itself, these become more evident, more apparent. These are the areas that we face almost on a daily basis. So on one part, there's the whole issue of ideology and ideological differences based on interpretation of the Quran. It was mesmerizing to me to learn in one of these courses when I took it here that from the Quran, whether it's literal or allegorical meanings in terms of interpretation, the hadith, whether it's weak or strong or whatever, comes straight down. Every source of knowledge in Islam is debated. So then how do we know that we are the right one, this one of 72 or 74, whatever it is? How could we be sure? How could we be sure that it's not the next one? And this becomes a problem. And everybody know, from my assessment, so let me just make that clear, believes they are the chosen ones or the saved ones or whatever the biblical equivalent would be. And everybody else is wrong. More fundamentally than that, I think there is need to address the issue of ijtihad, interpretation. Are we allowed to interpret? Because that is one of those fundamental divides. I think there needs to be a common Muslim position on the takfiri ideology, where it's okay to kill a Muslim if they are closer to non-Muslim behaviors or interpretations than they are to ours. I think those are the two key ones that need to be addressed, because that is causing fundamental splits in the community as we know it. That is accounting for the emergence of preachers like ISIS and Sufis on the two extremes. Yeah? But while we are fighting that fight, here comes the Pope preaching messages of peace and love and humility. And suddenly everybody's in love with the Catholic Church. And let's be clear, all he is a marketing person, you know. He is speaking to an audience in a context where their community is shrinking, their contributions are shrinking, and he is sending the right messages, and he is mobilizing as never before. Now, what does that mean for our fence line Muslims? Your guess is as good as mine. It doesn't take much for some people to make that jump, or it may not take much. So they have the Pope on one side, or preachers of peace and love. You have science on the other side attacking this whole construct and concept of religion and its relevance in today's world. And what you have is the emergence now of religion-less spirituality. So let's do yoga on a Monday and a Wednesday evening at the gym. And in stretching and in doing all this stuff, we get this deep spiritual insight into breathing technique and so on and so forth. And that's what you have emerging. The extension of which is the devotees, if you will, practice yoga out in nature to reconnect with Mother Earth. And that's where we're seeing a lot of this development. An environmental consciousness, deliberately avoiding religion as one of the backlash or the responses to all of these things. Whilst we continue to argue whether the person who saw the moon was a valid witness or not. Yeah? So I mean, put yourself on the fence line and ask yourself, well, what would you lean towards? Or which direction would you take it? I think what we're seeing in the mosques, if nowhere else, what we're seeing in the schools, what Imam Shafi mentioned in terms of the numbers pursuing religious education, tell us all we need to know. Right, the other big issue within the Muslim community, we have not in Islam matured a management model that bridges theology and administration. So there's constant back and forth, almost fighting. In some cases, actual fight. Who's in charge? Is it the theologist, the scholar, who may not be a good administrator or strategist? Is it the administrator who may not be a theologically sound referent? But nobody knows. And that is manifest in the organization at the micro level, and that is manifest in the community at the macro level, and therefore you have anybody, literally anybody, could stand up and say anything about Islam, justify it with their own spin, and castigate 1.6 billion people in the mix. Baghdadi did it, and you had this reactive response, Baghdadi from ISIS, and you had this reactive response with almost 1,000 scholars by now lining up to condemn that ideology. You can't kill the innocent, Islam is very clear, and so on and so forth. So, the organizational model is something that we need to pay attention to. What happens as a result is what we're seeing in the context of dysfunctional politics. Organizations who are redundant, they're doing the same thing, and therefore it becomes wasted resources, or they're competing with each other. I build a mosque, oh no, I build a mosque too. Yeah? In the same location, you know, in one place I've been to is over the road from the other. It's remarkable. And it's remarkable in its inefficiency, if nothing else. So, in terms of challenges, I think these are the fundamental ones that we need to pay attention to, which, if resolved, can augur to the benefit of the community as a whole. And then beyond that, it becomes pretty straightforward. What should a response include? What should be that framework for our response? Which is how do we react, or how do we respond to the challenges that we face? Let's recognize, first of all, that there are differences between what can happen, what should happen, and what is happening. So, what is happening, that is where we are. This is the starting point. What should happen is the ideal, that's what we're working towards. What can happen in terms of possibility is something that our strategies would define and develop further. So what is happening, from my lay perspective, paying some attention, but really not that much. Everybody is forming their own little clique, their own little niche. Overwhelmingly, the majority of that attention has been events-driven. And being a promoter in a previous iteration, I could tell you there's a great emphasis on foreign acts. So Ismail Meng, and this one, and that one, and all these foreign scholars coming. To what extent does their message align with our schools of fiqh? Not really sure. To what extent are they aware of the cultural sensitivities in Trinidad and Tobago? Again, not really sure. But nobody cares, because from the promoter's viewpoint, we gain 15,000, 20,000 people. Fabulous. This event was a success. And we get volunteers to do it as per the Gary Cooper observation on the Islamic model. Well, we don't even have to pay people. When I was promoting, we had to pay people for them thing, you know. So you have foreign acts doing events, and it becomes almost entertainment. Almost. A decreasing reliance on organizations. So there was one guy, I'm not sure who he is, I remember the name Zahir, who was diagnosed with cancer, and this became the life-altering experience that he was waiting on. And he now goes into the communities and mobilizes resources. But you know what? We should have been doing that all along. Yeah? I commend his efforts. What could he have achieved if he had the backing of an organization, any organization? One can only imagine, but we won't know yet, unless we get that thing fixed. So everybody is doing their own thing. There are two people I know of who, between the two of them, account for over a dozen Islamic organizations, in Trinidad and Tobago. They have registered this at one point and then that at one point and whatever. Now, what is the driver of that? I don't know. Where are the organizations today? Well, they're registered, but not much else. So certainly, there are people with ideas who will take a step, but I mean, it all falls down from there. Are the ideas good? Something we need to look at? Or are they political divisions for the purpose of resource mobilization or influence or whatever not? So we need to, first of all, decide whether those things are useful, the constructs, and then how can we fit it into the network, into the cluster, into the portfolio of Islamic organizations to take it forward. It does, this trend of everybody breaking out and doing their own thing, it does suggest some problems looking ahead, particularly in terms of the future of representation. Because as it is now, we have the organizations who are enacted in Parliament and so on as the representatives of the Muslim community. But even in the recent past, we started to see some suasions towards that. I could bring you X number of whatever, and I could bring you these many people and this type of influence and so on. That will only increase. That problem will only increase if nothing is done about this. Who will control the brand of Islam is something that I would question, because if I am a militant Takfiri jihadist and I want to call down jihad on Babylon under the banner of Islam, I'm free to do so. I'm free to do that right now, in fact. And there's very little that can be done to stop it. And that's the concern. That gets worse. Let me note a couple of positives as well, and I think I would state here, in the interest of full disclosure, I am involved with the Markaz in different capacities at different times, and therefore I am aware of some of the drivers behind some of these things. So I see the need for greater research in Islam. What does Islam present as ways of solutions to contemporary problems? We had the Green Lean effort, excellent initiative in terms of the natural environment, and we have in the Markaz syllabus that I'm aware of, I'm not sure how that has changed, but Muslims in minority. So what is the fate of us in a non-Muslim country, Islamic sects and groups, and well, what is the conflict and what accounts for it and what does it look like? Islamic psychology, sociology, philosophy, remarkable pieces of work. I have to say, simply because you don't see anything else like it. And I'm talking anywhere. The closest we've gotten is Ahmad Akbar from the US, who has been focusing on some nuances in Islamic theology. Beacon and some other guy in terms of leadership. But really that has been about it. You haven't seen much else. So Islamic psychology, Islamic sociology, Islamic philosophy, remarkable stuff. The course on leadership, for example, So research, we're starting to see some of it. And we're starting to see it in pretty interesting areas. What is the psychology of an afterlife in terms of your behavior here? The construct of salat and how is that going to shape what you do and how you do it as a Muslim versus a non-Muslim is something that, as an example, we need to be paying attention to. These are things we could highlight. Yeah. Apart from research, there is critical need in my review for PR/dawah/media work. And there are, at varying times, a lot of different stuff happening within there. I know the Markaz does some events from time to time, and quite a lot of media content. To what extent is that distributed is the next conversation. And then other events are happening, and to what extent are those things archived and made available is the next conversation by itself. Just to close all of this off, we could look at the model of the Muslim community in Singapore as an example of what can be. We could look at the model of the Muslim community in Pakistan as another example of what can be, both at two ends of the spectrum. The theological interpretations can create such a divide that it becomes physical. So that's one direction we could go. And the other direction is where we have a constellation of Islamic organizations who complement each other. You focusing on dawah, fine. You focus on dawah. We focusing on fiqh, fine. We focusing on, and so on and so forth. Yeah, one organization entirely dedicated to teaching Arabic and Arabic consultancy and translation services and so on. And nobody interferes with that. So you can have this cluster of complementary organizations so that we all hold in each other's hands and moving this thing forward. What it would require in the Muslim community immediately and moving forward is a change of leadership. And by that I mean not the leaders themselves necessarily, but of the mindset or the approach. Yeah, so don't go and wage bloody revolution in the next elections, wherever, right? What we need is a change in that mindset. So it's not us versus them and this one and you getting this and so on and so forth, but rather, hey, look, we carving out, we have strengths in this area, let's build that. My bias, because I'm a management background by essentially, is you need much more effective management at every level where you have representation. So from the imam at the operational grassroots level, akin to the supervisor and instructor, straight up to the executive director or president general or whatever the title is. I think if there is a focus on management, essential management skills as a profession, not a position, then we could start to see a lot more happening in terms of planning, organizing, coordinating, and control. Yeah? And I think that's something that we desperately need. And then finally, if nothing else, in terms of mobilizing the competencies, we have a lot of people who want the experience, and in fact, I'm sure he spoke to the need for learning, and initially, and the whole thing on reading. I'll just throw this out. If you have been up to date with your readings on technology and education, for example, the conversation now is knowing is becoming increasingly irrelevant. Because you don't need to know anything as long as you have access to Google, Wikipedia. Literally, you don't. You don't need to. You can learn how you learn, and you could ramp up that very quickly and become an expert overnight. And more, that's what we're seeing. That's how the conversation is shifting. The emphasis now is on expertise and experience. CPD credits in the academic system, continuing professional development stuff. Show us you can do. We assume that you know, or that you can tap into the searches to get the information. And I think that is a golden opportunity for our organizations to mobilize available talent, bring them on board, and let them run with whatever the focus of the initiatives are, so that we can build those competencies and enjoy successes for the individuals in the secular system, even as we benefit from their expertise or growing expertise for our organizational purposes. And with that, I want to underline, yes, the challenges manifest in a lot of different ways. There are also a lot of positives that Rupert Murdoch and they decide we don't need to care about. And I think we as Muslims individually should start to pay more attention to that. What are the good aspects coming out in the system? I think moving beyond that, there is need for the different organizations within the community to get their acts together. And I don't mean AXE, I mean ACTS. And I think there is a role for any one of us who is concerned enough about that to actually play. I'll probably just close it off with this reminder, where there is a hadith in which the Prophet, peace be on him, is reported to have said, every person is a leader, even if it is of themselves. But if you find that you have strengths in particular areas and you are better than others in certain skills, I think it's expected of you. That's between you and your God, of course, but it's expected of you that you give of it, not just for your benefit, career and profession-wise, but also for the benefit of your community. And therefore, don't be afraid to get involved based on what your strengths are. Don't be afraid of the concept of leadership. It's not as romantic in Islam as it's made out to be here. And we will be held accountable for it, ultimately.